Good morning, friends. I'm Chelsea Helms. Welcome. Happy day after Valentine's Day on this Monday. Hope you all had a wonderful Heart Day, celebrating those who you love and are ready to have more of our special Heart Month programming. February is American Heart Month, a month that is, of course, critically important to the American Heart Association. Each week on House Calls, we highlight topics that educate you on how to take care of your own heart. And this week, we are focusing again on the hearts of the women who we love. Today, we're discussing maternal health, a very important topic that really does sometimes get overlooked. First, we ask you to like and subscribe to the American Heart Association YouTube channel so you can stay up to date with all of our House Calls content. Also, throughout the show, we're going to ask you get involved by answering a few of our viewer questions. It's super easy to respond. All you have to do is text AHA Live to 22333. Take a look at your screen. To comment, all you got to do, text AHA Live to 22333. If you don't want to text in, no worries. You can simply participate by dropping your answer in the comments section on our YouTube feed as you tune in with us. We also have a new feature I want to call out. It's a donation option, and it's just in time for Heart Month. You'll see it right there on your screen. So if you're up for it, make a donation while watching the show with us. Every dollar will go to life-saving research that could help save the life of yourself or someone you love. Lives of people just like the real women who I have here with me today. And this is the perfect transition into my very first guest. Today, we have two real women from our 2021 Go Red for Women maternal health class joining us to share their personal experiences. The real women represent a sisterhood of women who actively, urgently, and passionately participate in the Go Red movement. Their volunteer work helps ensure that every woman knows that her heart and cardiovascular health is her top concern. Take a look at this video to get a full appreciation of the power of real women.
When I was 33 years old, I finally got pregnant.
Certainly when I found out I was pregnant, we were over the moon.
I wanted to be a mother my whole life. I was like obsessed with I can't wait to get pregnant and have kids. I just always wanted that.
Heart disease and stroke were not even on my radar.
After the birth of my second child, I discovered that I had peripartum cardiomyopathy.
I remember sitting there and the doctor's like, so you have cardiomyopathy, your heart is failing. And I turned and I was like, what? I never even thought of that.
I am a survivor of peripartum cardiomyopathy, which is pregnancy-induced heart failure.
When I was 37 and a half weeks pregnant, I had an aortic dissection in my ascending aorta.
I was diagnosed with peripartum cardiomyopathy and I survived a stroke.
I so quickly realized how fragile life is and how hard pregnancy is.
When I was in the hospital, I was so sick. I just wanted to get home and I wanted to take care of my kids.
I spent the next several days crying, thinking that I was going to leave my 6-day-old daughter.
And she said, your worst nightmare is coming true. You're having an aortic dissection. Today is baby's birthday.
At the time of my son's delivery, I was scared. I thought something was going to happen. I was going to die, and I just wanted to see him.
She asked us if we had to choose between you and the baby, who would you want to choose? Nobody should have to answer that question, especially at 33 years old.
And when the doctor showed him up to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's perfect. It was worth it. This was totally worth it.
I was able to have a C-section and an open heart surgery on the same table.
What I had could have been prevented.
Women's bodies go through so much strain during pregnancy.
This has forever changed my life, and all I want to do now is to be able to help someone else.
I had to get up. I had to get moving. I had a young son. I needed to be at my best.
It's okay to put yourself first because you want to be your best self for your kids.
Women that are pregnant at any age need to make sure they are aware of what is going on with their heart.
As time went on and, my child gives me hugs and stuff to this day, it's it just feels like I wouldn't trade anything in the world for this. This is what it's meant to be.
Through this journey, I joined a club I never wanted to join, of women who had heart issues when they were pregnant. But don't let this fear rule your life. Take care of your heart, take care of your mind, take care of your body, and enjoy every single day you've been given.
With me live this morning is Meredith O'Neill. Meredith, thanks for joining us today. Would love to hear a little more about your story.
Thanks for having me. I had an aortic dissection, which a lot of people, when I try to explain it, I always just say it's what John Ritter passed away from. And I had it when I was 37 and a half weeks, as I explained in there. And it was very touch and go for a while, but I survived and I'm doing well today because of it. And my baby is doing great too.
Yeah, not only did you survive, but you're thriving, and we're so excited to see that. So Meredith, would love to hear what you feel has been the toughest part of your journey.
I'm really glad you asked that because it's something that we don't talk about a lot. For me, the physical journey was, I would never say easy, but took a shorter amount of time than the mental journey. I've had to deal with PTSD. I've had to deal with mom guilt, that I haven't been able to be the one that was up. That I thought I was going to have. And that was probably the hardest thing that I had to deal with post heart event.
Well, with that said, how's your health today? I mean, you can talk about mental, physical, what have you, and how would you say your family's doing?
Well, Jeffrey, that's my son, is 2.5 now since our crazy thing happened on August 30th, 2018, his birthday. And he is talking all the time, loving it. We've had him out of school for the past year just because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but he's going to be going back soon. I'm doing great. I had a couple of complications post surgery, but other than that, I'm doing great. I'm working out. I'm spending time with my family. I've seen a therapist. I just really feel like I have done a lot of work to get to the place that I am today.
Well, I think that's key. A lot of people think that you just go see the doctor once and you can be cured. But I think the word work is key in that you put in the work and now you're seeing the outcome. Any words of wisdom you'd like to leave with our audience this morning, Meredith?
Yes. I was the 5th dissection in 4 generations in my family. So I am such an advocate that everyone should know their medical history. Share it with your doctors. It is your biggest thing that you can do for yourself and your heart health is know your medical history, share it with those that take care of you, and know your body. Don't question your body. Don't be embarrassed. Don't die of doubt.
Don't die of doubt. Really powerful words to leave us with this morning. Thank you for joining us, Meredith. And really thank you for being such a great role model and advocate for women's health. We'll be hearing from another maternal health survivor a little later in the show. But first, let me introduce you to our expert. With me this morning is Dr. Kathryn Lindley, Associate Professor of Medicine and Director of Washington University Center for Women's Heart Disease. Dr. Lindley, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Glad to have you with us. Before we do dive into our discussion, let's start with a viewer response question. True or false? The United States has the highest maternal mortality rate among developed countries. So go ahead, text AHA Live to 22333 if you'd like to go ahead and join in on this question and answer with us. So doctor, would you like to talk a little bit about this, Dr. Lindley? I know that a lot of us are probably hoping that the answer is B, false, but given that it's being posed, I wonder if it's true.
Yeah, so absolutely. Unfortunately, the United States does have the highest maternal mortality rate among developed countries. And over the last several decades, it's continued to rise. And what may be surprising to many people is that heart disease is actually the leading cause of death among pregnant women and new moms. And those deaths related to heart conditions can occur when women are pregnant or at the time of delivery, or even up to a year after delivery. And so, as Meredith mentioned, really knowing your heart health is really important, but also important is to know that women who don't have pre-existing heart conditions can also develop really serious heart conditions related to pregnancy. And so just knowing the signs and symptoms is also really important.
Absolutely. I know we're going to talk a lot more about this in depth in our next segment coming up here, but wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who took a minute to go ahead and answer. It looks like a lot of you knew the answer was true. We do have the highest mortality rate among developed countries. Let's go ahead and move on now and get started with our next segment, Health in the Headlines. One current headline that further illustrates the topic at hand. This week, we're pulling from our own news vault with an article from the American Heart Association. It reads, "Why Black women are less likely to survive pregnancy and what's being done about it." Dr. Lindley, would love to hear your thoughts about that article.
Yeah, so this is a startling but unfortunately true statistic that Black women are actually 3.4 times as likely to die related to pregnancy as white women are. And they also seem to have much higher rates of cardiovascular complications related to pregnancy as well. Now, there are a lot of different reasons why this may be true. We know that Black women oftentimes have less access to healthcare related to less healthcare insurance coverage, and many times Black women have a higher burden of cardiac risk factors such as high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. But there's certainly likely some systemic factors such as systemic bias and systemic racism and lack of community support that contributes to these numbers as well. So there are a lot of experts who are currently working hard to try to address this, trying to better understand why these numbers are true, improve access to care, and reduce some of those systemic bias factors.
Yeah, I think when we begin talking about race in healthcare, a lot of people always go to the word genetics, but a lot of times we don't often think about, the social determinants of health that are just so important and have such a vast difference on the different races in our country, and very important to talk about like we're doing today. A lot more questions to get to, so we're going to move on to our main segment with the live viewer questions you are sending in, and you ask, we answer. Talking today, you can submit your questions in the comments section, or you can submit them to us on heart.org/housecalls. We'd also love to have you share your stories. We're inviting you to share your survivor stories. Please feel free to share those through the comments section as well. All right, Dr. Lindley, our first question is coming to us from Celia in Charlestown. She asks, why is pregnancy called nature's stress test?
That's a really good question. And pregnancy is really a big stressor on the whole body, including the heart. During pregnancy, the heart has to do about 50% more work than it does when you're not pregnant. Also, during pregnancy, the body has to funnel a food supply to the baby. So things like blood sugar and cholesterol values all go up as well. Now, most women are able to manage this just fine, but for some women, this leads to things like gestational diabetes or preeclampsia or hypertension, high blood pressure. And so these conditions can have cause short-term complications for women, but also we know that those women who have those pregnancy-related complications, such as gestational diabetes or high blood pressure in pregnancy, are at higher risk for long-term heart disease as well. So it kind of identifies women who have failed the stress test of pregnancy and are at higher risk of going on to develop long-term heart disease and strokes.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about. Elena from South Texas wants to know, why is the American Heart Association talking about maternal health? What does having a baby have to do with my heart? I know you just touched on a little bit of that, but let's elaborate a little further if we can.
Well, pregnancy is, as I mentioned, a big strain and a big stress on the heart. And although most of us are willing to take that risk in order to have a family, for some women, it can cause really serious complications. So certainly for women who are going into pregnancy, either with a heart condition or with risk factors for a heart condition, such as high blood pressure or diabetes, those risks are increased. But as I mentioned, even women who go into pregnancy without any underlying risk factors for heart disease can still have complications related to pregnancy. There are sort of unusual types of heart attacks that are more common during pregnancy, and different types of heart failure, such as peripartum cardiomyopathy. So it's important that women be aware of these conditions and know the symptoms of them so that they can get really prompt treatment if they were to develop them.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to this next one. It's coming to us from Vicky in Madison, Wisconsin. Vicky says, I'm thinking about having kids in the future. What should I be doing to have a healthy pregnancy and protect my heart?
Well, it's really important that in order to plan for a healthy pregnancy, you start talking to your doctor now. What you want to do is really have all of those cardiac risk factors screened for. So you want to know if you have high blood pressure or diabetes so that you can get those risk factors under really good control before you go into pregnancy so that you'll really be optimized. It's also going to be really important that you work towards a healthy weight before you go into pregnancy. And then you can start your prenatal care really early on in the pregnancy. And all of those things are going to help set you up for a really healthy pregnancy. The other really important thing is if you already have a heart condition, for example, if you were born with a heart condition, a congenital heart condition, it's important that even if your condition was repaired with surgery, that needs to be evaluated as an adult before you go into pregnancy, because even conditions that have been repaired can sometimes have long-term problems associated with them.
Well, I just want to ask you this off the cuff really quickly. What about for people who have, the history of heart disease in their family? Should they maybe consider just not having children?
That is unlikely to be the case. The good news is that the vast majority of women can safely have babies, even if they or their family members have heart conditions. There are a small number of women for whom we typically do not recommend that they proceed with pregnancy because that risk of dying is so high. But that's a small group of women, typically women, for example, who have pulmonary hypertension. We recommend against pregnancy, or women with very severe heart failure, we recommend against pregnancy. But most women, if you're evaluated before pregnancy, and there's a problem, we can often treat that with surgery or other interventions that can lower your risk and make pregnancy acceptable.
Good to know, Dr. Lindley. Rosa from Tucson asks, how does my health during my pregnancy impact my long-term health? I know you touched on this when you were speaking about the gestational diabetes, but anything else we should be worried about?
Yes, absolutely. So it's really interesting that this is a unique opportunity for young women to kind of have a window into their future cardiac health. So pregnancy complications like gestational diabetes and all of the high blood pressure disorders like preeclampsia, eclampsia, HELLP syndrome, also having a baby that's small for gestational age or growth restricted, preterm birth, all of those things are associated with a higher risk of long-term cardiovascular disease and stroke. So women who've had those conditions, it's recommended that after their pregnancy, that they be seen by a doctor to have sort of routine cardiac screening for blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, and to start working on their cardiovascular health with diet, exercise, and that they continue to be seen by their doctor on an annual basis to have those risk factors adjusted to try to improve their long-term health.
Well, Dr. Lindley, this is a truly great conversation so far, and it's a topic that personally deeply affects so many people. We have a lot more questions to get to, but we're going to shift gears really quickly and hear from another survivor who has lived this. I'd like to introduce Jen Rowe, another member of the class of 2021 Real Women. Welcome to House Calls. We're so happy to hear from you, Jen. We did get a glimpse of your story in the video we saw at the beginning of the show, so we'd like to hear a little bit more about your experience.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So most of my symptoms were really about a few days after the birth of my second child. I was extremely tired and I was having shortness of breath, which I initially thought was a panic attack, but it got so bad I went to the hospital and they ran several tests and they found out that my heart was functioning at about 18% and that I had peripartum cardiomyopathy. From there, they put me on ECMO life support, which is just the highest form of life support to help keep me alive and try to figure out what to do with me. Ultimately, they had to remove my heart and replace it with a total artificial heart. With that, that was my bridge to a heart transplant. There were several complications that I had with that. I had a stroke from a blood clot that broke off of it. But ultimately, I was able to get my heart transplant, and I've been, just getting better and taking care of my kids ever since.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. It sounds like you have had quite the journey, though. So tell us, what do you remember the most about how you felt when you heard from the news from your doctor, and really what went through your mind in general?
It was a very big shock. I had no history of heart issues. It was never something that was brought up that much during any of my doctor's appointments. And, when the cardiologist came in right when I was diagnosed, he said, "You can never, ever have another baby." And, that's so shocking because I thought there was a possibility that I would have more kids. And now, that wasn't the focus at all. It was, fighting for my life.
Yeah, what a crazy time to have to decide between choosing children and fighting for your life. But we appreciate you being so candid with us in your response. What would you say to another woman who's maybe experiencing something similar to what you've been through?
I would say you need to pay attention to your body. There are signs and symptoms, and, we can confuse those with other things. Like I thought I was having a panic attack, but it was ultimately heart failure. And, ask your doctors these questions. And if don't feel like you're getting the right information back from your doctor, don't be afraid to ask for a second opinion.
Absolutely. Always get that second opinion if you can. Now, of course, we mentioned it's American Heart Month, but we're also celebrating Black History Month. As an African American, what do you want our audience to walk away with from today's discussion, Jen? We'll have you answer that in just a moment. But first, we'd also like to invite our audience to visit heart.org/Black History Month, where you can learn more about some exciting scholar programs and even register for our business accelerator. So Jen, what would you like people to walk away with walk away from this conversation with, especially our people of color?
Yeah, I mean, at that, like was mentioned earlier, there is such a great risk for pregnant Black women. So we need to pay attention to our bodies and be our biggest advocate. And, you have to know your numbers. You have to know your cholesterol, your blood pressure, keep track of your BMI. You have to be an active part of your health.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know your story is something other survivors can relate to, which is really important. And I hope everyone out there listening has learned something from Jen today. I'd like to invite any of you in our audience to share your story with us too. Please join in and share it with us in the comments section. Maybe you've experienced something similar to one of our women who are sharing their stories with us today, or maybe you have a special person in your life you'd like to recognize. We love hearing from you, so go ahead and drop your line in the comments. Now, I do know we have a lot more questions coming in that we need to address, so let's go ahead and jump right back into it. Dr. Lindley, Linda in Kansas City asks, "I'm pregnant now. What should I be talking to my doctor about?"
One of the important things to talk to your doctor about is whether or not you're at increased risk for preeclampsia or high blood pressure related to pregnancy. There are a variety of different risk factors that have been identified that put women at increased risk for this high blood pressure related to pregnancy. And we now know that taking a baby aspirin helps reduce that risk. And having high blood pressure in pregnancy is definitely associated with many of the heart-related complications with pregnancy, including peripartum cardiomyopathy and strokes and aortic dissections. So reducing that risk of preeclampsia, if possible, is really important. I think also just talking to your doctor about what are the signs and the symptoms of heart disease, of heart conditions that you could develop, and what are normal versus not normal symptoms to be having during pregnancy, so that you really know what you need to be looking out for.
I hope all of the women are taking notes today on all of those great questions you had, Doctor. Gretchen in Portland, Maine wonders, I'm pregnant and I understand it's going to be uncomfortable. When should I worry that it's something maybe more than just uncomfortable, like something with my heart?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's very common in pregnancy to have some swelling and to feel shortness of breath because your body's working really hard, and it's not uncommon to have some shortness of breath. However, if you're having really extreme shortness of breath or extreme swelling, those are not typically normal symptoms of pregnancy. Another thing I always tell people to look out for is if you have a new cough, and it's not because you're having allergies or you have a cold, that can sometimes be a symptom of fluid in the lungs. Other symptoms to look out for are having a hard time lying flat at night or waking up feeling like you're suffocating, feeling of heaviness or squeezing in your chest, and heart racing that sort of comes on very suddenly that makes you feel dizzy or lightheadedness. The other important thing to remember is that many of these complications actually occur after delivery. So while it's important to be paying attention to these symptoms while you're pregnant, don't forget to keep paying attention after you deliver the baby, especially in that first month or so after the baby is born. This is a really important time to be paying attention to those symptoms.
This next question is a great one to bounce off of that last one. Jane in Nashville wants to know, who should I talk to and what do I do if they tell me I'm okay, but I just really have this feeling I'm not okay? I'm assuming she's meaning her doctors. If they're telling me I'm okay and I'm just feeling I'm not, what should she do?
I think it's really important to advocate for yourself. You know your body. I always tell women, sometimes I evaluate women who end up having nothing wrong with them, and they sort of apologize like, oh, I'm sorry that I took up your time. And I say, I would rather evaluate 100 normal women than miss one woman who's having something serious going on. It's always better to pay attention to your symptoms and get them evaluated. So if you are really concerned that something's going on and it's not being taken seriously, go get a second opinion. There's nothing wrong with getting a second opinion. You can go see your primary doctor, you can see your OBGYN, you can go see a cardiologist. There are a lot of different avenues that you can go to, and you can go seek out people who specialize in taking care of pregnant women with heart conditions.
Or you can see all of the above, right? You can never be too careful. Here's our last question from Jackie in Rhode Island. Jackie writes, I had my baby a few months ago. What should I be watching for related to my own health? I know you talked about this, but she wants some specific physical signs and symptoms as well as maybe mental well-being.
Absolutely. So, definitely after you have your baby, your shortness of breath should go away pretty well immediately. You should always be able to lay flat after you've had your baby. So if you've had your baby and you can't lay flat in the bed before you leave the hospital or when you get home, that's a red flag. If you have a new cough, that's a red flag. If you go home and you're having headaches or vision changes, that's a red flag. So these are things you really need to pay attention to. Mental health is really important as well. I've had 3 kids of my own, and I completely understand that having a baby when you have nothing wrong with your heart is incredibly stressful. So, having a baby when you do have a heart problem, it's just multiplied. So pay attention to how you're feeling mentally and emotionally as well. Are you having a lot of crying spells? Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you thinking about hurting yourself or your baby? These are things that you need to seek help for because there is help available for you and we want to help you.
Absolutely. Thanks for those thoughtful answers, Dr. Lindley. Let's go ahead and move on to our next segment, Triple Trivia. Triple Trivia is sponsored by Crazy Cool Science, our new social media campaign that pumps up the fun in science. Science is everywhere, and Crazy Cool Science proves it. We have 3 trivia questions lined up to test your scientific knowledge. Today's focus, maternal health, of course. Drop your answer in the comment section or text them in with your answer, and we'll find out if we have that audience of experts today that we usually have. So here's our first question. Question 1, cardiovascular disease, or CVD, is the leading cause of death among women in the U.S., accounting for about how many female deaths? So these are our options. We can see A, 1 in 10, B, 1 in 7, C, 1 in 5, D, 1 in 3. So again, the question is, cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death among women in the U.S., accounting for about how many deaths? So we can see our question, or our answers are already coming in. We have a few people for the last 3 choices. So we've got 1 in 7, 1 in 5, and 1 in 3. Before we give the answer away, Dr. Lindley, care to weigh in?
Yeah, so cardiovascular is the leading cause of death in the United States. It actually accounts for more deaths than all cancers combined. And in terms of maternal deaths, it actually accounts for over 700 deaths per year, which is just truly unacceptable for our new young moms. And with regards to overall cardiovascular deaths in the United States, it does account for about 1 in 3 deaths.
So it looks like we have a lot of people did answer that. We had a lot of people stuck between the 1 in 5 and the 1 in 3, but we appreciate everyone taking the time to answer. Our next question is, what percentage of all pregnancies are affected by hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, or HDP? We have A, 10%, B, 20%, C, 30%, or D, 40%. So again, the question is, what percentage of all pregnancies are affected by hypertensive disorders of pregnancy? Would you mind just describing, doctor, what a hypertensive disorder of pregnancy is?
Yeah, so there are a variety of different hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. And so that can include gestational hypertension, which means when your blood pressure is elevated, but there's no other organs that are involved. There's preeclampsia, which is when typically you have high blood pressure and you have some leakage of protein in the urine. Then there's preeclampsia with what we call severe features, which is when you have very high blood pressure with the protein in the urine, or evidence that other organs are being involved. So fluid in the lungs, or abnormal liver function numbers, or vision changes, or headaches. And then the really severe forms of that include eclampsia, which is when that high blood pressure is associated with seizures, or the HELP syndrome, which is when you have high blood pressure with low platelets and low blood counts and abnormal liver numbers. And all of those are associated with long-term cardiovascular problems, as well as peripartum cardiomyopathy. And there are a variety of different conditions that put you at risk for those, including having high blood pressure when you're not pregnant, as well as being an older mom, being obese or overweight. And this actually occurs in about 1 in 10 women, so 10%.
Yeah, and we can see a lot of our audience members went with that 10% answer. Some of you guessing the 20% as well. And as always, we appreciate all the time took by those who answered the question. All right, our last trivia question for the day. Women in rural areas and urban areas experience the same maternal mortality rates. True or false? This is a fascinating one, because you would probably think that if you live in a rural area, it's going to be more difficult to get to the hospital if you're having some sort of emergency. But I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this.
So this is something that I'm really sort of passionate about, and it's something that's more recently been studied. We know that there are sort of 2 groups of women who tend to be have a difficult time with access to care. That includes the very urban women who tend to have a higher proportion of Black women and have a lot of sort of oftentimes financial and sort of socioeconomic barriers to receiving health care. And then also the rural women, who oftentimes have a lot of financial barriers, but also physical barriers, because there's very limited resources with regards to obstetric care, primary care and specialty care like cardiology care out in rural areas of the country. So some recent studies that we have done have actually identified that the most rural areas of the country actually have the highest rates of maternal mortality, likely related to some of those access to care issues. However, it's important to recognize that that is when you separate the issue related to race. So Black women in rural areas still have much higher mortality rates than white women in rural areas. And again, Black women living in urban areas still have higher rates of mortality than white women living in urban areas. So I think it's important to separate out, are you talking about Black women versus white women, or urban areas versus rural areas? Because most of the women living in rural areas tend to be white. So I think there are a lot of access to care issues in both of those populations of patients. And I'm hopeful that with some of the kind of telemedicine changes that we've seen since COVID has come around, that we may be able to begin to start to address some of those issues.
And I think that once again, this is where those social determinants of health come back in and play huge factors. All right, everyone, that's it for trivia. We appreciate everyone taking the time to play along. And Dr. Lindley, truly, thank you for your expertise and time this morning. It's just fascinating to me to find out that maternal rates are just so high for us in the U.S. I'm shocked by that, but I am feeling hopeful that doctors like you are leading the way. Dr. Lindley, I would love to give you another moment to, just take the floor and add anything you'd like to add before leaving us today.
Well, thank you so much for just having me on to talk about this. I think it's a really important topic. I want women to realize that it's really important to pay attention to your heart health when you're pregnant, and not only when you're pregnant, but after you deliver as well. I think that's a time when we tend to shift our focus to our babies, but it's important to, as someone said earlier, to put yourself first still and make sure you're taking care of yourself. I think keeping that healthcare, keeping in touch with your healthcare team after you deliver the baby to make sure you're staying healthy after the delivery and in between pregnancies is really important for your long-term cardiovascular health.
Absolutely. Make sure you take care of yourself, because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others, right? All right. Thanks, Dr. Lindley. Appreciate you joining us. And thank you to everyone who joined us this morning live. That does it for our show today. But hey, maybe you're sitting there thinking, I want to watch more of these talks. Well, you can find any of our previous shows at heart.org/housecalls. And don't forget, since there are always more questions than we have the time to answer live, you can find answers to the questions we didn't get to today on the House Calls After Show. Look for it Thursday on the American Heart Association YouTube page. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the American Heart Association channel for more great content. And before we go, we're going to leave you with this one final video highlighting the life of a trailblazing African-American man, Bernard J. Tyson. The team at the American Heart Association recently produced a new podcast series on the health equity that celebrates his life and legacy. You can find the full series on the American Heart Association podcast, Stories of the Relentless, available anywhere podcasts are heard. I'm Chelsea Helms, and I'll see you back here next Monday. Have a great day.
So it's 50 years in the future. I'm 60 today, so I'll be 100. So it's 50 years in the future. I'm 60 today, so I'll be 110. Still alive, rocking in a rocking chair, reflecting. Reflecting as history is writing what we did on our watch. So how will history record us?
Well, the chairman and CEO of Kaiser Permanente died suddenly. Bernard Tyson died in his sleep early Sunday morning. In a statement, Kaiser says Tyson was an outstanding leader, a visionary and champion for high-quality, affordable health care for all Americans.
For the company's first black CEO, Tyson was a champion for accessible health care, racial justice, and workplace diversity. He was just 60 years old.
The American Heart Association's mission is to be a relentless force for a world of longer, healthier lives. In our pursuit of that mission, we're having some amazing conversations along the way. Welcome to the special edition series on equity, honoring the life, leadership, and legacy of Bernard J. Tyson. These are the stories of the relentless.
Learn more about house calls, Real Docs, Real Talk, and submit your questions at heart.org/house